Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for What Do You Say? Strategies for Tackling Tough Conversations. My name is Dawn, and I'm going to be taking you through the webinar this afternoon. And with me is my colleague, Robin. She is our behind-the-scenes expert there to help you with any tech issues you have. So feel free to reach out to her in the question part of your webinar panel there. And hey, Robin, how you doing?
Good. How are you? Welcome, everybody.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks, Robin. And she'll also be sending out those polls that you'll see throughout the webinar as well. All of the resources, the strategies that I'll be sharing today are found in that resource document you see. I'll refer to it as a hyperdoc, and it is a link in the chat box, I believe, right, Robin? Is that in there now?
Yes, I just posted it when you mentioned it.
Okay, fantastic. So it's in there. Go ahead and open that up at any point during the webinar for those different strategies and resources that I'm going to be referring to. Today's webinar is brought to you by Blue Apple Projects. These are PBL units that are meant to engage students, teach the content you need to teach, all while making the world a better place. Each project includes everything that you need to bring project-based learning to life in your classroom. And because you are viewing this webinar, whether live or the recording, you can save 10% on your next Blue Apple project using the code webinar at blueappleteacher.org. So before we dive into today's topic, I'm curious to find out who is on the line. So Robin's going to open up a poll here, and let's take a look to see what grade levels do we have represented. Hey, Robin, if you want to go ahead and kind of let us know what those are when they come in.
Sure thing. Give it a couple more seconds.
Sure.
All right. So it looks like we have 48% elementary.
Okay.
And then 28% middle school, 28% high school.
Okay, fantastic. So we have an incredible representation here. Now, regardless of the grade level you teach, the strategies I'm going to share really work across the grade levels. You just kind of look at those different resources and tips through the lens of the students that you teach. So the webinar, we're going to divide into two parts. The first part of the webinar, I'm going to share with you a process to help you have those difficult individual conversations, whether they're with a student, maybe a parent, possibly a colleague, when there's differing perspectives that really create some tension that needs to be addressed in order to move forward. And then I'm going to end the webinar with those difficult classroom conversations when you have topics or challenging, sensitive current events that happen, whether nationally or locally, that really shake up your classroom and kind of throw that lesson plan out the door. You know, what do you say? What do you do? So let's take a look at those difficult individual conversations here. And we've all had experience with them. And I'm just curious, Robin's going to put the poll up now, but if you could finish the statement for me. Having a difficult conversation with another person is like a Band-Aid. You just want to rip it off, get it over with. Is it like a pothole you always try to avoid at all costs? Is it a work hazard, just part of the job? Or is it none of those? What is a difficult conversation like to you? I'll give you a few more seconds, Robin. Let me know when those are wrapped up. And what do we have here?
All right. So the winner at 58% is a work hazard, just part of the job.
Yep.
And then followed by 30% say pothole. I always try to avoid it. 9% Band-Aid and 3% none of these.
Okay, all right. I would say I'm probably somewhere in between a pothole and a work hazard as well. So although difficult conversations are never easy, that's why they call them difficult, they're important to have in order to move forward, to progress. And so I came across this meme. I thought it was very well put. When we avoid difficult conversations, we trade short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. So it's important to have. They're needed. This diagram you see here on the right of your screen, these are just more kind of general overviews of tips when you're going into difficult conversations just making sure you're waiting until you're calm. You're educating yourself on the perspectives of the person that you're talking with. You're asking open-ended questions to get clarity. And of course, throughout, you're listening well, you're actively listening, and you're empathetic. Now, I'm going to take you through a practical process that uses those tips the next time you have a difficult conversation. So what happens when you see an issue in two different ways and you're at this impasse and you really need to meet one-on-one? Well, the overall goal of any conversation is to participate in a productive conversation. So you're moving forward, but you're also preserving that relationship. And that's so important. Just making sure that that goal is kind of in the front of your mind as you're planning for that conversation, as you're engaging in that conversation. And the process I'm going to share with you has been adapted from Douglas Stone's work from Difficult Conversations. You can see that book there on the screen. I also have taken that process and created this template. This is in the HyperDoc. It's linked in the HyperDoc there. This will help you as you're planning that conversation out, and also helping you kind of summarize what's going on during that conversation so that you can share that information then with that individual that you are having that conversation with. So difficult conversations can happen at any time with anyone. And so to give it a little context or frame, let's set the stage, a little scenario here. So let's say that you've scheduled a conversation with a parent who does not share your perspective regarding the behavior of a child in your class. So you are seeing some behaviors that are really preventing that student from being successful, and also causing some trouble with the students around them, some misbehavior, some disruptions. And you've reached out to that parent to share your concerns, and maybe you've done that via email, and emails have gone back and forth, but the parent just doesn't see eye to eye with you, or is just not willing to accept that this is happening with their student. So how do you handle that? Because you're at a point now where things need to change. So you've scheduled this one-on-one conversation. So before that conversation, what you really want to do is you can use that template, that planning template, to help really collect your thoughts. Make sure you check in with yourself, kind of where you're at emotionally. If there's some sort of emails going back and forth that upset you a little bit, make sure you process that and before you go into a conversation. And determine what your specific goals are. What is that purpose of the conversation? Do you need to bring someone else into the conversation? My suggestion is, especially if this is your first one-on-one conversation with the parent and it's a very sensitive topic, is just to do this with the parent without bringing in, let's say, an administrator, because just remember the overall goal is to preserve that relationship. Now, again, if it warrants to bring in another person like the administrator, then obviously do that as well. As you're planning for it, think about the questions you might ask. What are some clarification questions that you need answered to really help you understand their perspective? And if there is conflict during that, if emotions start to ramp up a little bit, what are you going to do? Are you going to have a plan for maybe tabling that conversation and rescheduling it? Or is there a different strategy you might approach if that happens? So when you begin that conversation with that individual, make sure that you share the purpose of the meeting. If you're working with a parent, you're talking about an issue with their child, you both have the same goal. You want that child to be supported, cared for, and successful. So when you're starting off that conversation, acknowledge that you have a difference in perspective, but you share a common goal. And there's no judgment there. And state a genuine interest that you really want to know their perspective to help you understand and learn that other person's point of view. And that you also want an opportunity to share what you are seeing. And then propose, after you both share, that you problem solve together in order to move forward. So offer the opportunity for that parent or individual to talk first, their turn to share. As they're doing that, actively listen. Listen by being engaged, by being empathetic and kind, which are incredibly important in any conversation, especially in a difficult one. And paraphrasing as you go for clarity, making sure that you fully understand, and acknowledge emotions. So like, for example, I'm so surprised to hear that. Can you tell me more? Ask open-ended questions along the way for clarification as well. Once they have finished their point, their perspective, and you feel like you have a really good understanding of that, then ask for permission. Is it okay if I share my perspective that might be a little bit different than yours? And then as you are sharing that, just be positive. Bring in those positive characteristics, qualities that you see of their child. And, you know, again, reiterate that goal. You want them to be successful and you want to do your best, and you're going to need some help to be able to do that. But be honest, be specific about the examples of what you're seeing in class. And also acknowledge that the conversation and their sharing of their perspective has really helped you learn a lot, learn something about that student that you didn't know before, that might have changed your perspective, something that's happening maybe at home that you didn't realize that's going to change maybe how you view different situations that come up in your classroom. Once you've both shared your perspectives, now it's time to really work together to problem solve, to brainstorm possible solutions. What can you do at school, you know, in the classroom when that student is showing those behaviors? Now, is it something that you've learned, like maybe they just don't work well in a group setting, although collaboration is incredibly important, but can you scaffold that? Can you start off with letting that student do something individually and then in a pair, and then, you know, at that point where they're ready, then into a larger group? Again, anytime you're coming up with these solutions, action plans, just being positive, keeping that goal of that student's success in mind, and making sure you're a united front, you're a partnership, you're a team when you're developing that action plan. And as you're ending that conversation, you can summarize what was said and that action plan, but also determine those next steps. Do we need to have another meeting? Do we need to bring the student in to share this information so you can show that you're a united front and that you want the best for that student? And then obviously thanking that parent for their time and continuing that partnership. And to keep things on track and communication going, send a follow-up email after the conversation that summarized the discussion, but also that action plan and those next steps. Continue communications throughout, and if you do need to have another meeting, if things aren't progressing as you would like, you know, determine if it's time to set up another meeting with additional people at that point. So that is a process to help with difficult conversations for working with individuals, whether it's a parent, possibly a colleague, or maybe tweak it a little bit if this is something that you want to use with the student, depending upon the age of your students. So now we're going to shift gears and focus on those difficult classroom conversations when those current events just really shake up your classroom. And there have been a lot of current events that have caused ripples in the classroom. And as a teacher, just not knowing exactly how to respond. Very high emotions can be evoked, possibly divisive types of situations where students are coming into things with differing perspectives and viewpoints. They're going to have a lot of questions. Now, what do you do in that situation when this news shakes the world, shakes your community, and you're coming into your classroom of your 25, 30, plus students, and you're teaching, and how do you respond? Well, I'm not going to have Robin put a poll up here, but I just wanted you to take a moment to reflect or think about, what do you do when a sensitive current event disrupts your plans? Do you continue onward with the lesson? Do you create an entire new lesson addressing that issue or event? Or are you somewhere in between on that continuum? And there's no right or wrong answer here, because you know yourself, you know your students and what they need. So what I'm going to share for you are some things to consider as you're trying to figure out, what do you say? What do I do when I walk into my classroom after an event such as things that have happened in the news of late? Well, the first thing that you really want to do, and it's like with any difficult conversation, whether you're doing this individually or with a whole group of students, is to start with you. Where are you at? Check in with your emotions. You're going to need to have a moment to process that as well. And here are some examples of some reflection questions you can use to help you process that. So what emotions does this news raise you? What questions are you struggling with? What emotions might your students bring to the classroom? How can you respond? And how are you going to continue to learn and process as the event unfolds? So take some time to really process that. Now, you know that if this news breaks overnight and you have to meet your students the next day, that's not enough time to really process all that. And you also want to be able to read the room to really see kind of where are your students, because there are some assumptions that you'll want to investigate. Some students that you thought might have a certain reaction, maybe you thought they'd come in with a lot of questions or very angry, that they aren't. You know, they're more quiet and maybe a little bit more reflective. So really identify what your students need and give them and yourself space and the grace. So the best thing to do as you're processing and your students are processing is just to allow that time for your students to possibly reflect, allow them to journal. You give them maybe questions, maybe use those same questions I just shared for you to ask yourself. Give them a choice. Maybe they just want to buckle down and do some work, whether it's for your class or another class, or they want to investigate further. But if they have a lot of questions and you're not ready to address them or answer them, be honest, let them know, and just say, we're just going to all take some time. We're going to process, and then we will circle back to this, when it's time. And that gives you time to talk, reach out to other people around you, your colleagues. How are they doing? How are they responding to this? And can you coordinate those efforts? In elementary will look different than secondary. Elementary, you may want to do a school-wide type of discussion, and you determine how you're going to do that together. And at the secondary level, the students aren't going to do that every single hour. Maybe you decide as a school that, this is something you're going to have a discussion about in a particular hour of the day, and then you work to coordinate that. Bring in the experts, bring in your counselors or your school psychologists to really help you with those discussions and prepare and plan for that if that is something that you are going to do. Then, because these issues can be they're challenging, they're sensitive issues, making sure that you're keeping that line of communication open with parents. Let them know and give them a choice to opt out of their child out if that's something they want to talk to their child about, and encourage questions from them as far as, how is this going to look? What are the type of activities that you might be doing during this type of discussion? And then, very important is, before you even get into this discussion, is to prepare your students for these types of discussion. Now, the strategies I'm going to share are good for any discussion, but especially when you have very challenging or sensitive topics where students are coming in from different perspectives and there's a lot of emotion that is built up. So one great thing to do before you have these discussions is teach perspectives. Help students to understand that everyone in the class is going to be coming in with a different point of view, or seeing things a little bit differently. And a great way to do that at all levels is to bring in the optical illusions and to teach that differing perspectives this way. So I want to ask you, Robin's going to put up a poll there. How many of these rectangular blocks do you see? How many do you see at first? How many did you see at first? Do you see 3 or do you see 4? How many did you see at first? And Robin, go ahead and when that's coming in, if you want to let us know.
All righty. All right. 82% saw 4 and 18%, or so that leaves 18% saw 3.
Okay,
Pretty good
excellent.
gap
So,
there.
yeah, so we had a differing perspective. Now, there was a majority, and I have to fall in the 4 category as well, that saw 4. But there was a good percentage of the group that did see 3. And if you take a look here, it really depends on where you look first. If you look on the left, you'll see 4. But if you look to the right first, you see 3. And so it's just a really great way to teach students that depending on how you view things, it's really going to change your perspectives. A couple of other examples here. Again, I have this slideshow will be put into the HyperDoc, be emailed out to you as well. So if you'd like to use these as your teaching perspectives, please go ahead and do that. But this is something that I know was an internet sensation for a while, the gold and white dress or blue and black dress. And you know, for me, I see gold and white, but there are some people that see that differently, blue or black. What do you see here? What do you see here? Do you see 5 silhouettes, or do you see these columns or very creative pieces? And here, do you see a young woman staring off to the left or right, excuse me, or do you see an older woman kind of facing forward? Again, a really great way to teach perspectives to your students, bring in those optical illusions. Along with teaching perspectives, we want to teach our students also about mindsets when they're getting into very difficult conversations that could be very emotional and very passionate. And when I talk about mindset here, I'm talking about the soldier versus scout mindset. This poster is a great thing, and this is also linked in the HyperDoc to have in your classroom when you're teaching mindsets to your students. And the soldier is someone that just defends their position no matter what. There's no budging. And then the scout mindset is someone that's always searching for the truth and willing to change their perspective if the information they're given is persuasive enough for them to do that. And then there are times where you want to take a soldier mindset, and there are times where you want to take a scout mindset. And so I wanted to share with you just a couple of activities that you can do with your students. Again, this is all in the HyperDoc for you to take and use. Here, these are different scenarios where you would have your students determine if a soldier mindset would be better or a scout mindset would be better. So it's a really just great sorting activity to help them understand the difference between the soldier and scout mindset. Now, there are times where students need to take a stand, and they want to be soldiers. And so sharing with them some tips on how to be an honorable soldier, how to stand up for a viewpoint, for what you believe in, providing those facts and persuading others to do that in an honorable way. So there are 4 tips that you can share with your students when they're sharing their perspective. First, just like we do when we have difficult conversations, we need to check in with ourselves. Our students need to, before they share, just make sure they're in a space where they can respond calmly. So take a deep breath. Also find opportunities where you and the other side agree to help build those bridges. Encourage your students to use words like I feel like or I think to evoke empathy, and so they're not necessarily on the attack, that they're really bringing it to how they feel and not saying, well, you believe this or you feel this way and that's not right. Something that's really showing that empathy piece. And then backing it up with true, reliable facts is so important when sharing your perspective. An activity you can do to help your students use those 4 tips to be an honorable soldier is to have them go through some scenarios and write a script. Again, this is in the HyperDoc. And so they can decide how they would respond using those 4 tips that I just shared. So we talked about teaching students perspective. We talked about teaching students about the scout and soldier mindset. Now we want to teach our students how to be active listeners. And I came across this, and in my 43 years, I guess I've never realized this, that the word listen contains the same letters as silent. I mean, wow, that's pretty incredible. And that's what we want to be. When we're actively listening, we are silent. We are listening to understand, not be understood. So there are a couple of strategies that I like to share with you. This is called the HEAR protocol. I really like this one because it's easy to remember because it's an acronym, but it's also something you could put up in your classroom. You could create like visual images for your younger learners as well. But you have, when you're actively listening, you're halting, you're stopping what you're doing and saying and really listening. You're engaging, you're giving that person your full attention. You're anticipating what they're going to say is going to help you understand their perspective, but also you could learn something new. And you also want to replay. You want to summarize what they said, paraphrase in your own words to make sure you understood correctly. So that's just a great quick protocol to help teach active listening. Again, this is in the hyperdoc. Another way to teach active listening, if you're looking for something maybe a little bit more involved, there are some guidelines, and that resource again is in the hyperdoc. But talk to students about being able to empathize, being attentive, keeping your eye contact. Show those nonverbal behaviors like nodding and understanding, or mirroring the person that's talking, and their behaviors. Paraphrasing, restating important thoughts or ideas, making sure you're not interrupting or offering advice or giving suggestions, because it's about the person that's talking, not about you, not about the listener. And remain neutral and ask open-ended questions for clarification. So just another great resource to help teach your students about active listening. And the last thing I wanted to share with you is hot off the presses. Today, we have our newest timely topic called Information Nation. We want our students to be careful and critical consumers of information. And so we put together this timely topic, 4 inquiry-based lessons to help teach information literacy. Because as current events happen, new news is going to keep filtering in, and there's going to be this onslaught of all this information. And what your students do with that? How can they really critically examine that information and make sure it's reliable? Well, I just wanted to share really quickly 2 of those lessons that are in Information Nation. One of them is called Is It Crap? And this is a great protocol to use, your students use to check the validity of a source. Is it current? Is it relevant? Is that the author an authority figure on that subject area? They're expert. Are they a known expert? Is it accurate? Are they backed up by citations or other sources? And what is that purpose? Is it trying to sell you something, or is it biased? Or does it give multiple viewpoints? Or does it share one viewpoint but with multiple supporting sources or citations? And then you can have them use that protocol to identify if these websites are fact or fiction. So a great lesson to use this protocol to teach how to find reliable sources. And another one, this is called the Quest for the Truth. And this is really great because students do a scavenger hunt to find the cure for scurvy, because scurvy has ransacked this pirate ship from the spread of misinformation. And they answer these different questions based upon what would be the best source for them to go to. And if they get it right, they get from the treasure chest, you see that there in the QR code, then they get a letter. And eventually when they're all done, if they've gotten all the letters, it will spell out what it is that will cure scurvy. So it's just a really great interactive way to teach informational literacy for your students. And then finally, I just wanted to share a couple of resources that I found there in the hyperdoc. All Sides, this is a news source that shows perspectives from all sides, left, right, center. This media bias chart, you can put in your publication, it'll show where it is, if it's on the left, right, or center. And then Newsela, great resource for current events that's unbiased, and it is also filtered by Lexile level. I'm going to skip that. And I just wanted to let you know that this is the tip of the iceberg. I'm shared with you a few strategies and resources to help you with difficult conversations, both individual and in your classroom. But I'd love to keep that conversation going. So we'd love to talk to you, come to your school, whether in person or virtually. So please let your administrator know about us, and we'd love to, again, keep that conversation going. Join us for our next webinar. It's next month, differentiation. Hope to see you there. And then finally, I wanted to offer this up to you. If you want, take a screenshot right now, or type in dawn.mccotter@vaei.org into your email and send me a note. Share with me a strategy you have used when dealing with difficult conversations and topics, because we've all been there. And then I will put you in a drawing to win a free Blue Apple project. The project Take a Stand, some of those resources I shared, that was one of 10 projects that you can pick from if you win. So again, share with me a strategy or an idea to help that you've used that helped you deal with a difficult conversation or topic, because we are better together. We are better together. So thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for everything you do every day for your students, for your school, and for your community. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and a fantastic school year. Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.